What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of The Bass Journey. I'm your host, Action Jackson, and I want everybody to grab their trusty katana. Today, we're going to be talking about how to cut through the mix. Welcome back to the show. Now, in the modern era of bass playing, we have a lot of bass players who are trying to cut through the mix and be heard. And this can be very difficult to achieve because as bass players, we deal with more low frequency sounds that are harder to hear as opposed to the high frequency sounds that are associated with guitar playing. And so I present to you a list of 5 tips for cutting through the mix. Bars. Number 1, change your bass strings. Pretty simple, right? As bass players, we tend to get a set of bass strings and keep them on our bass for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 1,000 years. And I would assume this is mostly because bass strings are pretty expensive. And this is why you should get yourself some Silvertone bass strings. Yes, for the low price of $9.99 plus shipping and handling, you can get aggressive mids and crushing lows from Silvertone bass strings. Vintage tone at a vintage price. Problem is, the longer you keep strings on a bass, they start to lose that bright sound and they start to sound more deep and mellow. Deep and mellow is not necessarily what you want if you're trying to cut through the mix. You want those bright sounds, those mid-range treble sounds. And you can achieve this pretty simply by just changing your bass strings to a new set. Now, to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I'm going to play a bass groove with old strings and then that same bass groove with a new set of strings. As you can see, the new strings have a much more bright and punchy sound in comparison to the old strings. Number 2, pump the mids and treble on your bass amp. Now to do this, on your bass amp, you have knobs that say bass or low, mids, and treble. You want to turn the bass or low knob down and then turn the mid and treble knobs up. This is going to add more punch and mid-range to your signal, which is a lot easier for people to hear when they're listening to a record. Now, maybe you don't want to mess with the knobs on your bass amp because you like your tone and it took you a while to find those settings on your bass amp. Well, this brings us to number 3. Instead of turning the knobs on your amp, use the tone control that is on your bass guitar. The further you turn the tone control up or towards the neck, you'll get more treble and mid-range in your signal. The further you turn it back, you'll get more low end in your signal. Now to cut through the mix, like we mentioned before, you want to add more mid and treble range into your signal. And the way you can do that without touching your bass amp is just turn up the tone control on your bass. And that way you can keep those settings on your amp, but you can still add more mid-range and treble tone to your tone by just using the tone knob on your bass. Now, a good example of this would be Mike Dirnt from Green Day. If you listen to his bass playing, he plays a P bass. You can tell that he has the tone knob turned up fairly far. and he has a more bright and aggressive sound as a result. Now for number 4. One way to cut through the mix really well is to use an overdrive pedal. Okay? Now, you really want to be careful with this because overdrive tends to make a very aggressive and distorted sound, which is not always good for all types of music. This isn't really something you would want to use in jazz or more softer kinds of rock. If you're playing more aggressive styles of rock music, then one way to cut through the mix really well is to use an overdrive pedal to get that grungy, distorted kind of sound. And for an example, here's what overdrive can sound like on a bass guitar. Now, for number 5, play a jazz bass or a Music Man bass or a bass with a humbucker pickup. Now, the reason I say this is because when Leo Fender came up with the jazz bass, he had in mind guys who were playing bass in a jazz band where it's a big band setting. They have horn players, loud guitar players, a keyboard player, a loud drummer, and it was very hard for bass players to cut through the mix with a P bass. And so he came up with the jazz bass, which allowed bass players like Jaco Pastorius to have more mid-range aggressive growl to cut right through the mix and be right in your face with the bass tone. And so this has been 5 tips on how to cut through the mix as a bass player. I want to give a special shout out to all of my subscribers, all 404 of you. I really appreciate you guys. I never thought that I would have this many subscribers on YouTube playing bass and talking about bass. So thank you very much for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, please consider doing that. Also, I have a surprise for you guys. My band is filming a music video next week, and I'm very excited about that. So I can't wait to see what you guys think about it after I post it on here. And if I missed any other good ways to cut through the mix, make sure you put that in the comments for other people to see. I also try to read all of my comments, so make sure you guys do that just in case I missed anything. Make sure you practice bass today, and no matter what you do, stay free and stay safe.